I never imagined a lawyer's office could feel like a battlefield. Yet the moment I stepped into Green and Associates, that's exactly what it was. The oak-paneled walls closed in around us, polished so well they gleamed under the cold fluorescent lights. The smell of old paper, ink, and furniture polish hung in the air, sharp enough to sting. The long mahogany table stretched between us like a no-man's land. At one end sat Ms. Carter, the attorney, stoic, professional, already arranging her files with deliberate care. She didn't look at me or at my father. Her job was to keep order, to be the referee when the inevitable blows landed. Across from me, my father sat like a general, posture rigid, eyes hard as flint. He didn't just occupy his seat. He commanded it. Every line on his face seemed carved deeper tonight, as though he'd aged decades in the week since Mom's funeral. Yet his voice, when it came, had lost none of its sharpness. Beside him, lounging with the arrogance of someone who thought the game was already won, was my older brother, Evan. He wore a tailored suit that looked like it had stepped straight out of a magazine spread. One leg crossed over the other, hands folded casually in his lap, his smirk aimed directly at me. I knew that look. It was the same one he'd given me since we were kids, mocking, daring, certain I'd lose. I slid into the chair across from them, my hands damp against the polished wood. I tried to steady my breath, but my chest felt tight, every inhale like drawing in smoke before a fire. Ms. Carter cleared her throat, ready to begin. But before she could speak, I opened my mouth. I'd like to say something. No, my father cut in, his voice cold and final. His hand slammed flat against the table, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. You don't talk here. Not a word. The air went still. My lips pressed shut, but my heart pounded louder, louder like a war drum inside me. Evan chuckled under his breath, a low, dismissive sound. Don't make this dramatic, Lily. Let's just get through it. The weight of their eyes pressed down on me. My father's glare was a warning, Evan's smirk a taunt. And in that moment, part of me wanted to explode, to shout every truth I'd buried for years. But instead, I breathed out slowly and forced myself still. Because I remembered what Mom had told me. If they silence you, let me speak for you. I didn't need to fight. Not yet. So I sat there, hands folded, expression calm, and gave the smallest nod to Ms. Carter. A nod that said, go on, let's begin. What they didn't know, what they could never have prepared for, was that Mom's voice would speak soon. And when it did, the battlefield wouldn't belong to them anymore. At 29, I was everything my father never wanted in a daughter. Still in the same small town where I was born. Still working at Millie's Cafe. Pouring coffee into chipped white mugs for regulars who called me kiddo even though I'd long since stopped being one. Still living in a one-bedroom apartment above the florist on Main Street, where the smell of roses and soil drifted through my window every morning. To Dad, my life wasn't just disappointing, it was proof. Proof that I had failed. Failure wasn't something he ever had to say out loud. It lived in the curl of his lip when I came home in my cafe uniform, in the way he introduced me to his business friends with a forced laugh. This is my daughter Lily, she's still figuring things out. Meanwhile, my older brother Evan had figured everything out. Or so Dad believed. Evan worked in finance in Chicago, drove a glossy black BMW, wore suits that cost more than my monthly rent. Every holiday he brought home expensive bottles of wine and stories of success. Dad drank up both with pride. To him, Evan wasn't just a son. He was an investment paying dividends. I was the sunk cost, but Mom never saw me that way. Claire Whitman, my mother, had a way of softening the world. She didn't care that I didn't leave town. She never measured my worth in salaries or degrees. To her, staying close meant loyalty, not failure. When Dad dismissed me, she pulled me aside, touched my cheek and whispered, "You've got more backbone than both of them combined." For a moment, I believed her, and when the cancer came, I learned just how much she meant it. Ovarian cancer. 3 words that shattered everything. At first, we thought she could beat it. She was that kind of woman. But the treatments wore her down. The light in her eyes dimmed, though she tried to hide it. I was there for every appointment, every long night. Every time she squeezed my hand until her knuckles turned white. I learned the details no one else bothered to notice. That she liked her tea with just 1 spoonful of honey, not 2. That the blue quilt kept her warm when nothing else did. That if I told her funny stories from the cafe, about old Mr. Jacobs ordering pie at 7 in the morning, she'd forget, if only for a moment, how much her body hurt. Dad came when his schedule allowed. He sat by her bed, but his eyes were always on his phone. Evan breezed in with oversized bouquets that filled the room, but not her heart. He'd snap a picture, post it online with captions about being a devoted son, then vanish 20 minutes later. The world applauded him. Mom only sighed. One night, when her strength was fading, she reached for me. Her hand trembled as she pressed a small flash drive into my palm. Her eyes, still clear, still unyielding, met mine. "If they try to silence you, let me speak for you," she whispered. I held it like a secret weapon. A promise. And sitting in that lawyer's office weeks later, across from Dad's scowl and Evan's smirk, I knew this wasn't just my backstory. It was the reason everything was about to change. The air in the conference room felt too thick to breathe. It wasn't just the weight of grief. It was something sharper, heavier, like judgment pressing down from every corner of those oak-paneled walls. The mahogany table stretched between us like a trench in a war zone. On one side, me clutching the strap of my bag so tightly my knuckles went white. On the other, my father and my brother, two men who'd spent my whole life telling me where I didn't belong. Ms. Carter, the attorney, shuffled her papers with quiet precision. Her voice was calm as she began. "We are gathered today for the reading of Claire Whitman's last will and testament." My stomach twisted at the sound of Mom's name. For a moment, I almost forgot where I was. I could still see her smile, still hear her laugh that always carried through the kitchen. But the memory was quickly shattered by the cold glare my father leveled across the table. Before Ms. Carter could continue, I cleared my throat. My voice came out softer than I intended, but firm enough to be heard. "I'd like to say something about Mom before we start." The response was immediate and brutal. My father's hand slammed against the table, the sound cracking like a whip. "No, you don't speak here. Not a word." The words carried the same authority that had ruled my entire childhood, the kind that silenced questions, stifled opinions, crushed defiance before it could breathe. Evan smirked, leaning back in his chair with all the ease of someone who thought he was untouchable. "Don't start with the theatrics, Lily. Let's just get through this. We all know how it's going to go." Heat rushed to my face. I wanted to lash out, to scream that he didn't know everything, that Mom hadn't just left him the keys to the kingdom. But Mom's voice echoed in my memory. "If they silence you, let me speak for you." So instead of fighting, I slipped my hand into my bag. My fingers brushed against the cool plastic of the flash drive. I pulled it out and set it carefully on the table. The click of it against the polished wood echoed louder than I expected. "What's that supposed to be?" Evan's smirk faltered. I looked straight at Ms. Carter, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "This is Mom's voice. She wanted it played here, tonight." For the first time since I'd walked into the room, my father didn't speak. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, but he stayed silent. Evan shifted in his chair, suddenly less sure of himself. Ms. Carter hesitated only a moment before nodding. "If Mrs. Whitman left a message, it's only right we listen." She reached across, picked up the flash drive, and slid it into a small speaker. A low hum filled the room as the device powered on. The silence that followed was unbearable, like the air itself was holding its breath. The battlefield had shifted, and in seconds, my mother's voice would cut through the silence and change everything. At first there was only static. A faint rustle, the soft scrape of paper, then a pause that felt like an eternity. And then, her voice. "This is Claire Whitman," Mom said, her tone calm, steady, deliberate. The kind of voice she used when she wanted to be impossible to ignore. "If you are hearing this, it means I am gone." The room froze. My father's fingers, which had been drumming impatiently moments ago, went rigid against the arm of his chair. Evan leaned forward, the cocky tilt of his lips replaced by something tighter, more brittle. Mom continued, her words flowing like water that had been dammed too long. "I spent my life loving this family, loving a husband I believed in and raising two children I thought would carry forward not just my name, but my values. In the last years of my life, I learned truths I never wanted to know." I felt my throat tighten. I'd been there when she recorded this. Not in body, but in spirit, her hand gripping mine when she whispered, "Let me speak when you cannot." Her voice grew harder, sharper, steel wrapped in velvet. I know you counted the insurance money before I was gone. I know you spoke of me as if I were a balance sheet to be closed rather than a wife and mother still breathing. John. Evan. You treated my illness as an inconvenience. You treated my absence as an opportunity. Dad shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening, a vein rising in his temple. This is nonsense, he muttered, but his voice cracked in the middle, and for once it didn't sound like authority. It sounded like fear. Mom's tone softened then, warm in a way that broke me open. But Lily, my Lily, you were there. Every day. Every hour. Through the pain, the nausea, the sleepless nights, you were my anchor. You made me tea when I couldn't lift the kettle. You read to me when the words blurred. You reminded me of the world outside the hospital walls when I had almost forgotten it existed. You gave me dignity when others gave me pity. Tears blurred my vision. I clenched my hands together under the table, trying to stay steady. To my husband and to my son, she said, her voice cooling again. You will receive nothing from my estate. This is not punishment. This is justice. You did not value me when I lived. You will not profit from my death. Evan shot up in his seat. What? His voice cracked high, indignant, as if the very universe had betrayed him. Dad's face flushed deep red, but Mom's voice kept flowing, unstoppable. To Lily, my daughter, I leave the house, the accounts, and the policy. More than that, I leave my faith. Live your life free of their judgment, and know that if I had another lifetime to choose again, I would still choose to be your mother. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was unbearable, heavy, absolute. Ms. Carter folded her hands, her expression unreadable. Evan looked like he'd swallowed glass. My father's stare was a storm, wild and dangerous, but behind it, for the first time, I saw something else. Defeat. And me? For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in his shadow. I felt unshakable. The room was no longer silent, it was suffocating. The echo of Mom's last words still clung to the air, thick and unshakable like smoke after a fire. Evan's chair screeched against the polished floor as he shoved it back. This is insane! That recording, she was sick. She didn't know what she was saying. His voice cracked with desperation, the arrogance stripped away, leaving something smaller, weaker. My father leaned forward, both fists planted on the table. His eyes burned into Miss Carter, the attorney, like he could will her into rewriting history. You can't honor this, he growled. That was not a legal amendment. My wife wouldn't disinherit me. Ms. Carter's composure didn't flinch. She adjusted her glasses, her voice even but firm. On the contrary, Mr. Whitman, the recording is not the only document. Claire prepared a new will 6 weeks before her passing. This recording was her request to accompany it. Her hand slid across the table, placing a crisp folder directly in front of her. She opened it with deliberate care, as if the act itself carried weight. My heart pounded against my ribs. This, Ms. Carter said, tapping the top page, is Claire Whitman's final and legally binding will. It leaves the entirety of her estate, assets, property, and holdings to her daughter, Lily Whitman. The words rang out like a verdict. Evan's face went pale. No, this isn't real. Mom loved me, she wouldn't. His voice dissolved into a strangled sound, more panic than protest. Dad's rage exploded. He slammed his palm so hard against the table that pens rattled and papers jumped. She was manipulated, he roared. This girl, he jabbed a finger at me, his face contorting, poisoned her, filled her head with lies. The old fear in me wanted to shrink back, to disappear under his fury like I always had. But not tonight. Tonight I saw what Mom had seen. His bluster was nothing but hollow noise. I met his glare with steady eyes. No, Dad, you silenced her when she was alive. You don't get to silence her now. For a moment, the battlefield shifted again. His mouth opened, ready to hurl another weapon at me, but nothing came. His authority had been gutted by the voice that wasn't here to defend itself, but had spoken louder than he ever could. Evan collapsed back into his chair, his head in his hands, muttering half-formed words of disbelief. The golden boy undone in a single night. Ms. Carter cleared her throat softly, cutting through the wreckage. If there are objections, you are free to contest in court. But as of this moment, the estate belongs to Lily. The finality of it echoed like the closing of a door. I sat there, my pulse racing, my palms damp, yet underneath the storm there was a stillness I'd never known before. Mom's last words had become law. The empire my father and brother thought was theirs had crumbled. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just the girl at the table, I was the heir. When the papers were signed and the conference room emptied, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. The house keys sat heavy in my palm, and the folder with Mom's estate details dug into my side as I walked out into the night. Money, property, legal ownership of everything she had built with a lifetime of sacrifice. That was the part written on paper. But as I stepped onto the street, the cool air brushing against my face, I realized that wasn't what she had truly left me. For years, I had lived like a shadow in this family, every decision judged, every word dismissed, every step measured against my father's impossible expectations. I thought survival meant silence, that love meant submission. But Mom's voice, her last words, had shattered all of that. She didn't just leave me her assets. She left me permission. Permission to be loud when I was told to be quiet. Permission to claim space at the table when others tried to push me away. Permission to live without asking for approval from men who measured worth in control and inheritance. As I walked past the cafe where I worked, I saw my reflection in the darkened window. For once, I didn't see the failure my father always named me. I saw the daughter my mother had chosen. Again and again, even in her final breath. The house would be mine, yes. The accounts too. But more than that, she had left me her faith. A faith that I was enough, that my care and compassion were worth more than arrogance or cruelty. She had rewritten not just her will, but my story. When I finally unlocked the front door of the old Whitman house a week later, the air inside still smelled faintly of her lavender candles. The rooms were quiet but not empty. I could almost hear her humming in the kitchen, the sound of her voice calling me in from the porch. I set the folder down on the dining room table, the same table where birthdays had been celebrated. Arguments had been fought, secrets had been whispered. For the first time, it felt like my table, not his, not theirs, mine. I traced my hand along the wood and whispered into the silence, "I'll do right by you, Mom." And I meant it. Not by keeping the estate intact or protecting the family name, but by living the life she wanted for me, a life unshackled from fear, a life where I could stand tall and speak, even if my voice trembled. What she really left me wasn't wealth. It wasn't power. It was freedom. Freedom to step out of the shadows. Freedom to build something of my own. Freedom to finally be her daughter, not his disappointment. And that, I realized, was the greatest inheritance of all.